Under the porch light, while my dad was away on business, my stepmother's fist met my cheekbone. She believed our quiet street would keep her secret safe, but I stared directly into the neighbor's blinking doorbell camera and whispered the exact time into my recording watch. She didn't realize the footage was already syncing to the cloud, or that her violence had just triggered a corporate ethics clause I designed myself for people who believe they are above the law. My name is Sloan Mercer. Friday night in Westmere Ridge has a specific sound. It's the sound of expensive irrigation systems hissing to a stop, the distant, muffled thwack of a tennis ball at the community courts, and the electric hum of six-figure hybrid SUVs pulling into garages that are cleaner than most apartments. It's the sound of silence, curated and enforced. Tonight, that silence was underlined by a high, thin wind cutting across the neighborhood. It was early autumn. The air smelled sharp, like dying leaves and fertilizer. Every lawn on our street was a perfect crew-cut rectangle of green, identical under the mandated warm yellow glow of the matching porch lights. My father, Graham Mercer, was not home. He was in Cedar Bluffs, 2 states over, finalizing a factory acquisition. That's what his text message, sent 12 hours ago, had said. Signing the West Point deal, going dark, love you. Going dark meant he was at the rural plant site, a notorious dead zone for cell reception. He was pressing flesh, shaking hands, and leaving the home front undefended. He was, as always, unavailable. I was in my home office, reviewing a bond indenture, when Helene Cross, my stepmother, knocked. Her knock isn't a request for entry. It's a warning. 2 sharp raps, like a gavel. I didn't look up. I'm working. Helene. The door opened anyway. She stood in the frame, backlit by the hallway light. She wore cashmere lounge pants and a silk blouse. She looked immaculate, her blonde hair pulled into a tight, severe bun that accentuated the sharpness of her cheekbones. We need to talk, she said. Her voice was flat. We can talk when Graham is home. No, we're going to talk now, like adults. She had a way of using the word adult as a weapon, a way to imply I was anything but. I am 32 years old. I am the head of compliance for Arcturus Dynamics, the company my father founded. I saved the document, the cursor blinking patiently on the screen. I knew this ritual. It was about dominance. It was about her reinforcing the hierarchy while my father was away. Fine, I stood up, pushing my chair back. The air in the office felt pressurized. What is it? Not here. She jerked her head toward the front of the house. Outside. It's 50 degrees out, Helene. Outside, she repeated. She didn't wait. She turned, the soft slap of her expensive slippers already retreating down the hardwood floor. I followed her, my own feet bare. The house was cold. The marble of the foyer floor felt like a slab of ice. She was already at the front door, pulling it open. The wind immediately rushed in, carrying the scent of damp pavement. What is so important it requires standing in the cold? I asked, stopping at the threshold. You know what this is about, she said, stepping out onto the front porch. She stood under the pale yellow light, a perfect silhouette of suburban rage. You countermanded my directive on the West Point PR budget. I didn't countermand it, I said, stepping onto the top step. The concrete was gritty and cold beneath my feet. I flagged it. The expenditure was questionable and lacked documentation. It's my job. Your job, she spat, is to support this family. Your job is to support me. Your father put me in charge of external affairs. That budget was my call. And my job is to ensure this company doesn't violate SEC regulations or our own internal ethics code. That budget was a violation. You think you're so smart, she hissed, taking a step toward me. I held my ground. I think I'm doing my job. You are an arrogant little... I'm done with this conversation, I said, turning to go back inside. That was my mistake. My back was to her for a fraction of a second. It was fast. She grabbed my left wrist, her fingers biting down hard enough to bruise the bone. The suddenness of it, the sheer physical force, took my breath away. She spun me back, using my own momentum against me. I still had my phone in my right hand. Helene's right hand came up. It wasn't a slap. It was a closed fist, aimed with precision. The impact was sharp, a concussive crack against my cheekbone, just below my right eye. My head snapped back. White light, like a flashbulb, exploded behind my eyelids. The immediate sensation was a hot, tearing pain, and the clicking of my teeth as they slammed together. I tasted salt and copper. The punch knocked my phone from my hand. I watched, stunned, as it flew, tumbling end over end in the weak porch light. It hit the flagstone walkway with a sickening sound, a brittle, plastic and glass clatter. The screen, my lifeline to the outside world, my connection to my father, went dark. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my face. The skin was already swelling, the bone beneath it aching with a deep, percussive throb. Helene stood over me, breathing hard. Her mask of civility was gone. Her face was contorted, her eyes bright with a victory. "Don't you ever," she whispered, her voice shaking with adrenaline, "go against me again." I stared at her. The pain was a rising tide, but something else cut through it. Calculation. My gaze drifted past her shoulder. Across the street? No, not across the street. Next door. Mrs. Dalrymple's house. Specifically, her doorbell, a Halo Bell Pro 4K, installed last month, and right now, its indicator ring was glowing, a steady, observant, digital red. It was recording. The motion of the attack, the sudden violence, had triggered it. I tilted my head, just slightly, maximizing the angle. I let the porch light hit the right side of my face, illuminating the damage I could already feel blooming, the split skin, the immediate discoloration. I looked directly at the lens, making myself a perfect subject for its high-definition sensor. Helene mistook my silence for submission. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "This is family business. Sloane, what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't dare," she said, poking a finger into my shoulder. "Bring this outside. You don't talk to your father. You don't talk to anyone. It's our word against yours. And who do you think he'll believe?" I kept my eyes locked on the red light of the camera. My left hand, the one she hadn't grabbed, was at my side. Slowly, deliberately, I brought it up, as if to cradle my injured face. My watch face was dark. I pressed the bezel twice, a sequence I had practiced. A haptic buzz, imperceptible to her, vibrated against my skin. The environmental microphone was now active, recording high-fidelity audio. I let out a shaky breath, pitching my voice just loud enough to be captured by my watch, but soft enough to sound like a pained whisper. 8:41 p.m., I said, the words thick from the swelling in my mouth. October 18th, Greyhaven, Connecticut. I was timestamping the file. I was establishing jurisdiction. Helene smiled, a cold, thin smile of absolute control. "That's right. You just remember your place." As if on cue, two sounds punctuated the heavy silence. From 2 houses down, Mr. Henderson's beagle started its nightly, frantic yapping, a predictable, annoying, and perfectly verifiable ambient sound. Then, from the street, came the distinct, high-pitched electronic whine of a hybrid slowing down for the stop sign at the corner of Westmere and Crestline. The sound cut cleanly through the night air. Another audible marker. My audio file now had a date, a time, a specific location, and 2 independent, verifiable acoustic witnesses. Helene turned, satisfied. She looked down at my phone, still dark on the walkway. "You should clean that up. It looks messy." She went back inside, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind her. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was loud in the sudden quiet. I stayed on the porch for another 30 seconds, my watch recording the silence, the wind, and the distant dog. Then I deactivated it. I walked down the steps, my legs shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fight, the adrenaline of the capture. I looked at the cracked, useless phone on the ground. Then I looked back at the small, red, blinking eye on my neighbor's door. Helene thought the darkness of the suburbs would swallow the incident. She thought she was shielded by the immaculate lawns and the silent, heavy doors of Westmere Ridge. She was wrong. She thought she was in a private space. She had forgotten that in modern America, the porch is a public stage, and Mrs. Dalrymple's halo bell was watching. I'm still standing on the flagstone path. My phone is a shattered piece of black plastic and glass, its screen a dark, spider-webbed ruin. My cheek is a galaxy of pain, a hot, spreading nebula that throbs with every beat of my heart. But I am not looking at the phone. I am looking across the small, perfect patch of grass that separates our property from Nora Dalrymple's. Specifically, I am looking at the small, cylindrical device mounted on the white trim of her front door. The house next door belongs to Nora Dalrymple. She is a 60-year-old widow whose husband, a private equity manager, died suddenly on a golf course 3 years ago. His death, combined with a substantial insurance payout, left Nora with two things: a lot of time and a profound, simmering anxiety about the world. She became, in neighborhood parlance, security obsessed. While the rest of Westmere Ridge installed aesthetic landscape lighting and polite, monogrammed welcome mats, Nora installed a perimeter that would make a military base proud: motion-activated floodlights that could illuminate a football field, reinforced steel door jambs, and the crown jewel of her fortress, the Halo Bell Pro 4K. I remember her showing it to me over the low boxwood hedge last month, while she was pruning her hydrangeas with obsessive, snipping sounds. "It's not just a camera. Sloan, dear," she'd said, sniffing. "It's peace of mind." She was intensely proud of the specs, reciting them like a catechism. 4K resolution. She had emphasized, tapping her gardening glove against the hedge. "Catches everything. It can read the license plates on the street, even at night." It had military-grade night vision, a 180-degree field of view that captured her entire lawn and most of ours, and most importantly, high-sensitivity directional audio capture. "It can pick up a whisper from 20 feet away," she'd bragged, her voice dropping. "I heard the Henderson boy 2 doors down trying to buy vape cartridges online." His mother was mortified. But the real selling point for Nora wasn't the live feed, it was the storage. And the best part, she'd leaned in, her voice conspiratorial, "isn't the alert, it's the record." Nora Dalrymple didn't trust the standard 30-day rolling cloud storage. She paid a premium for the legacy package, 12 full months of high-resolution cloud archiving. But Nora, ever anxious, a woman who wore a belt with suspenders, had a backup for her backup. Any significant motion event, that's what they call it, dear, significant, is automatically, instantly, packaged and emailed to a separate, private email address, a Hotmail account I've had since 1998. "Why?" I had asked, genuinely curious. "In case, she'd waved her shears vaguely, "in case the company goes under, or the cloud evaporates, or if someone," she'd lowered her voice, "gets access and tries to delete the main file. This way, there's always a copy, a record." A significant motion event. Helene's fist connecting with my face under the bright, unforgiving porch light certainly qualified. My stepmother's assault wasn't just recorded. It was already packaged. It was already processed. It was, at this very second, being duplicated and emailed to a 1998 Hotmail account, safe from deletion, safe from tampering. It was already a permanent record, filed away by a paranoid widow's automated security protocol. I turned my head slightly, wincing. The pain was sharp, a nail driven into my orbital bone. At the entrance to our perfect, manicured street, there's a large, tastefully carved wooden sign, "Welcome to Westmere Ridge, a covenant community." Below that, in smaller, elegant script, "Please respect our rules. No loud noise or disturbances." After 9 o'clock p.m., I glanced at my watch. the device still safely documenting the ambient silence. 8:43 p.m. Helene, ever the planner, had committed her act of violence with 17 minutes to spare. She hadn't violated the noise covenant. She had only committed aggravated assault, second degree. This is the Westmere way. This is the suburb I live in. We regulate the sound of distress, not the distress itself. We police the aesthetics of the community, not the rot within its homes. You can shatter a cheekbone, but God forbid you do it loudly after 9. The irony was so bitter it tasted like the blood in my mouth. I thought back to the last quarterly HOA meeting, held 2 months ago in the sterile, beige community center clubhouse. The air smelled of stale coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and the faint, unsettling sweetness of low-fat muffins. Helene, naturally, was there. She loved the performance of community leadership. She sat near the front, her posture perfect, taking notes in a leather-bound portfolio that matched her shoes. She looked every inch the capable, concerned executive spouse. The topic of neighborhood security came up. "I'd like to raise an issue," Helene had said, her voice carrying the smooth, practiced modulation of a corporate VP addressing a boardroom. "Privacy." Everyone turned. Privacy is the second god in Westmere, right after property values. "I'm speaking," Helene continued, aiming her gaze, a look of practiced, polite concern, directly at Nora Dalrymple, about the proliferation of high-powered surveillance cameras, specifically, cameras that capture more than just one's own property. Nora, who was sitting 2 rows back, bristled. "My camera is for my protection. Helene, it's a doorbell." "It's a 4K surveillance device." "Nora," Helene countered, smiling a thin, sympathetic smile, as if correcting a bright but misguided child. "Your camera points directly at the street. It captures my porch. It captures the Hendersons' walkway. It records audio." She let that hang in the air. The recording of audio was the real sin. "It is, frankly," Helene continued, "an invasion of our collective privacy. We are a community of neighbors, not a police state. We should feel free to have a conversation on our own property without worrying if Nora is listening in." There were murmurs of agreement. Helene had charisma. She knew how to frame her anxieties as a collective concern, a defense of their shared, privileged bubble. I had remained silent, watching the exchange from the back row. I watched Helene perform her role as the concerned, high-status neighbor, defending the sanctity of her home, the sanctity she needed to perform her private cruelties without witnesses. Now, standing on the cold stone, I almost smiled. The pain in my face stopped it from forming fully. Helene, for all her social maneuvering and corporate savvy, was legally ignorant. She didn't do her homework. I did. As head of compliance, I live in a world of precedent and statute. I thought of the specific case. Gray County, Vaas. Peterson, 2023. A local Amazon driver had sued a homeowner for recording his private and profane phone conversation while he was on their porch. The judge had thrown it out so fast it created a breeze in the courtroom. The ruling was clear, and I knew the precedent by heart. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy on a front porch, walkway, or any area of a property visible from a public thoroughfare and implicitly open to the public for access. The porch is not the living room. The law is explicit. Helene, in her arrogance, had chosen a stage. By grabbing my wrist and dragging me onto the top step, she had stepped out of the legal shadows of the home and into a quasi-public space. She had performed her assault on a set, under lights, and for a camera that was perfectly 100% legal. Her complaint at the HOA meeting wasn't just irony, it was a beautiful, self-defeating prophecy. That was Helene's core contradiction. She was a woman of absolute, obsessive privacy, but only for her secrets. Since marrying my father and moving into this house, she had transformed it. Opaque. Privacy film was installed on the ground floor windows, turning the glass into muted, blurry shields. All file cabinets were locked. She insisted on encrypted email for family matters and shredded all mail, even junk mail. in a heavy-duty micro-cut shredder she kept in the study. Her entire digital life was a fortress. And yet, she loved to perform. She loved the HOA meetings. She loved hosting the annual neighborhood block party, standing on our immaculate lawn in a white linen dress, laughing too loudly, a perfect hostess. She loved the drama of a public confrontation, like the one she'd manufactured with the mailman last month for leaving a package improperly on the step, just close enough for the neighbors to hear her righteous indignation. She needed an audience for her power. She thought she could control the narrative. She believed she could have a private fight in a public space and that the rules of the house would follow her. Helene, like so many in Westmere Ridge, believed in the sacred, invisible boundary. It's the 10 feet of grass and concrete between the front door and the public sidewalk. They treat it like an airlock. They believe the rules of the living room, privacy, secrecy, family business, extend all the way to the curb. They believe this dark space is unobserved, unrecorded, a place where the mask can slip, where the voice can get sharp, where a hand can be raised, before the mask is put back on to wave at the neighbor walking their dog. The Halo Bell Pro 4K didn't believe in that space. That technology, that paranoid, 4K, audio recording, cloud archiving eye, had eliminated the buffer. The porch was no longer a shadow. It was a high-resolution, time-stamped, backed-up file. Helene thought she was in a confessional. She was actually on a soundstage. I finally bent down, my muscles screaming in protest. The pain in my face was radiating, a dull, heavy pulsing that matched my heartbeat. I ignored my shattered phone. It was useless now, a casualty, collateral damage. I raised my left wrist. My watch face glowed to life. I had shut down the audio recording, but the device was still functional, connected to the house's Wi-Fi. I opened my messaging app. My hands were shaking, not from shock, but from a cold, precise anger. I tapped out a new message to Nora D. My fingers were clumsy from the adrenaline. I backspaced and rewrote the text twice. I needed the message to be simple, non-alarmist, but urgent. It had to give her a reason to look, a reason to preserve. The final text read, Nora, strange question. I think a delivery person may have damaged my phone on the walkway tonight. If you have any motion alerts from your front door camera around 8:41 p.m., please do not delete it. I may need it for an insurance claim. It was a plausible, boring, suburban lie. It protected the evidence without triggering a panic. It gave her a mundane, bureaucratic reason to preserve the file. Nora, a woman of process and records, would respond to that. I hit send. The message status changed to delivered. I looked up at Nora's dark house. In her bedroom, her phone would have pinged, and on a server somewhere in Virginia or Oregon. A file labeled Motion Event 2041-10-1825 was already nesting, safe, in her 1998 Hotmail inbox. The first lock was set. I turned, walked back inside my cold, dark house, past the foyer, and locked the deadbolt that Helene had closed behind her. I did not go upstairs. I did not tend to my face. The pain was a secondary concern, a data point to be logged later. The throb in my cheekbone was a metronome, counting down the seconds until the next phase of the protocol. I went back to my home office and closed the door. In here, I was not Helene's stepdaughter. I was not a victim standing on a cold porch. In here, I was Sloan Mercer, head of compliance for Arcturus Dynamics, and I was in my element. My job is, in essence, to anticipate the worst in people and then legislate against it. I write the rules. I am the architect of the corporate conscience, the person who builds the invisible fences that keep ambitious, powerful people from destroying the company my father built. I don't deal in emotions. I deal in bylaws, risk mitigation, and non-discretionary enforcement protocols. My world is one of clauses and subclauses, of carefully defined terms and binding arbitration agreements. It is a world Helene Cross has never bothered to understand. The document I had been working on when she interrupted me was still on the screen. It was a minor bond indenture, trivial. The most important document of my career wasn't on my screen. It was on the Arcturus corporate server, ratified by 2 boards of directors and signed in digital ink just 72 hours ago. It was the final merger agreement between Arcturus Dynamics and West Point Labs, a $30 billion deal that would create the 3rd largest aerospace defense contractor in the country. And deep within its 482 pages of legalese, tucked into the section on executive conduct and governance, was my masterpiece. Clause 12.4. On the surface, it looked like a standard, if unusually robust, morality clause. These clauses are common in high-level contracts, designed to protect a company from an executive's embarrassing personal behavior, a DUI, a messy public affair, but 12.4 was different. I had drafted it myself, and it was engineered for a very specific purpose. It states, in the dry, precise language of corporate law, that any senior executive of the newly merged entity found to be involved in an act of reprehensible personal conduct is subject to an immediate non-discretionary ethics review and potential termination for cause. But the key is in the definitions. I defined reprehensible personal conduct with surgical precision. It wasn't about vague morals or public opinion. The trigger was specific. Among other things, the clause cited any verifiable act of domestic violence, assault, or physical intimidation. Helene, of course, isn't just my stepmother. She is the Senior Vice President of External Affairs for Arcturus Dynamics, a position my father created for her 2 years ago. Her entire role is managing the company's public image. She is the face we present to the world, poised, polished, and utterly unimpeachable. She sits on the executive committee. She is, for the purposes of any corporate governance document, a senior executive of the highest tier. Her signature is on the merger agreement, right alongside my father's. She had read Clause 12.4. I was in the meeting when the general counsels from both companies reviewed it. Helene had nodded sagely, calling it a necessary safeguard for our brand integrity in a volatile modern media environment. She saw it as a shield to be used against others. She never imagined it could be a sword pointed at herself. But the original clause wasn't enough. A domestic incident, happening behind the locked doors of a Westmere Ridge mansion, would be a he said, she said nightmare. It would be my word against hers. And as she so helpfully reminded me on the porch, my father would be forced to choose. I knew who he would choose. He would choose the path of least resistance. He would choose to believe the woman who shared his bed, the woman who had, in his words, stabilized our family. He would call it a misunderstanding, a hysterical overreaction. He would ask me to be the bigger person, to keep the peace. I do not deal in keeping the peace. I deal in enforcement. So, last week, during the final round of revisions, I added an appendix, Appendix C7. It was a single paragraph, buried in a section detailing the procedural requirements for evidence submission to the Ethics Committee. It looked like bureaucratic boilerplate, legal housekeeping. No one paid it much attention. The appendix stipulated that for a complaint under Clause 12.4, to trigger the non-discretionary review process, the automated, unstoppable part of the mechanism, the submitted evidence must meet a specific standard. It required, and I remember the words I wrote as if they were carved in stone. Verifiable, time-stamped evidence, consisting of both moving visual imagery and corresponding audio, captured by a third-party or public-facing device in a public or semi-public space. I knew Helene. I had studied her for 5 years. I knew her patterns. Her anger was a performance that required a stage. Her moments of lost control never happened in the sealed, sound-proofed privacy of the living room. They happened in the liminal spaces, the garage with the door open, the front walkway, the driveway, places where she felt the thrill of public risk, but believed she was shielded by the unspoken codes of suburban silence. She needed the possibility of an audience to feel the full flush of her power. I didn't need to hope she would make a mistake. I didn't need to rely on luck. I had analyzed the data of her behavior and designed a system that would activate when her predictable patterns inevitably reoccurred. I engineered the probability, I built the trap, baited it with my own face, and set it in the exact location where I knew she performed her rage. The beauty of it was that West Point Labs signed it without a blink. In fact, their general counsel praised the appendix. "Excellent," he'd said over the video conference. "Adds clarity, protects against frivolous claims." West Point was running scared. Their former CFO had just been through a catastrophic divorce that had played out in the tabloids, complete with accusations of financial abuse and a leaked video of him screaming at his wife in a restaurant parking lot. Their stock had taken a 7-point hit. They were pathologically reputation-averse. They saw Appendix C7 as a guarantee that any future scandal would be handled cleanly. With irrefutable evidence, they saw it as a tool to protect themselves. And Helene, sitting beside my father in our boardroom, had smiled. She probably saw it as a way to get rid of some problematic vice president at West Point. The final piece of the mechanism is the automation. A complaint filed with the Ethics Committee that meets the evidentiary standards of Appendix C7 does not go into a queue for review. It doesn't wait for a human to make a judgment call. The system I designed automatically flags it, assigns it a case number, and distributes the evidence package simultaneously to the full 7-member Ethics Committee, the Office of the CEO, and the External Legal Counsel. An emergency session of the committee is automatically scheduled within 48 hours. The process is impersonal, it is mechanical, and it is irreversible. I am the chairperson of the Arcturus Dynamics Ethics Committee. It's part of my role as head of compliance. Any automated notification is sent to me first, by protocol, for docketing. Helene's fist striking my cheekbone was not just an act of violence. It was a corporate action. It was the physical act of pressing enter on a command line she didn't know existed. The porch was the semi-public space. Nora Dalrymple's Halo Bell Pro 4K was the third-party public-facing device. The file, currently syncing to the cloud and being duplicated to a Hotmail account, was the time-stamped visual and audio evidence. Everything was in place. Helene Cross had just, with her own hand, triggered her own professional demise. She had walked directly into a cage that I had built, a cage whose specifications I had written based on my intimate knowledge of her own behavior. She thought she was having a family dispute. She was, in fact, initiating a non-discretionary corporate governance protocol, and the first notification was about to arrive in my inbox. The protocol begins now. The first rule of compliance is chain of custody. You secure the evidence before you do anything else. Pain is temporary. A compromised data file is a permanent failure. My personal phone was a casualty, but I have redundancies. I retrieved my work-issued tablet from my briefcase. The screen glowed to life, a clean corporate desktop. I walked back to the front door, opened it just enough to slip out, and crouched on the top step. The cold of the concrete seeped through my pants. Under the yellow porch light, the evidence was small, almost insignificant, a single, dark red droplet on the pale gray of the concrete step. My blood. It was already beginning to congeal. I angled the tablet. The camera app opened. I framed the shot carefully, ensuring the droplet was in sharp focus, but also capturing the brass numbers of our house address, 12 Crestline Drive, screwed into the wall beside the door. The context was as important as the evidence itself. I switched the camera setting to live photo. I pressed the shutter. For 15 seconds, the tablet captured a tiny silent video, the wind rustling a fallen leaf near the bloodstain, the flicker of a moth against the light, a living, breathing piece of evidence. I saved it to a secure, encrypted folder on the device. File name, XHA Biological 2041, HEIC. Step 1 complete. I went back inside and sat at my desk. My cheek was a hot, swollen mass. I ignored it. Step 2. The primary source, the video. My message to Nora Dalrymple had been a placeholder, a digital "do not disturb" sign on the evidence. Now I needed access. A month ago, when I helped Nora set up her new Wi-Fi mesh network. I had also helped her configure her Halo Bell account. She had complained about the interface being confusing, the notifications overwhelming. "Let me set up a family share for you," I had said, my voice patient and helpful. "That way, if you ever get locked out or can't figure something out, I can log in as a guest and help you troubleshoot." She had been grateful. "Oh, Sloan, you're a lifesaver. What would I do without you?" What she had done was give me a key, a limited access, guest-level key, but a key nonetheless. I opened a browser window and navigated to the Halo Bell login portal. I clicked Sign in with Family Share. I entered my credentials. The system sent a push notification to Nora's phone. "Sloan Mercer is requesting temporary access to your Halo Bell account." My own watch buzzed a second later with her reply to my text. Nora. D. "Oh my goodness, Sloan, how awful. Of course, I won't touch a thing. Just approved your access. Let me know if you need anything at all." Perfect. Plausible deniability. She had granted access. I was in. The guest dashboard loaded. It was a simplified version of the main account, but it showed me what I needed. A chronological list of motion events, and there it was, at the top of the list. Event type, person detected. Time, 20:41:23 EDT. Duration, 01:32. My heart hammered against my ribs. A single, hard beat. It was real. It was captured. Before I clicked, I initiated step 3. My watch had been patiently waiting. The audio file stored in its small local memory. I opened the company's secure cloud sync application on my tablet. The watch appeared as a nearby device. I selected the audio file. File name, Audrey's ENV 10182025 204115 4A. I created a new, encrypted folder on the Arcturus corporate drive. The folder was named Q4 Vendor Audits, Miss Key. Inside, I renamed the audio file to something utterly boring, something no one would ever look for. VACCT Logistics Call Q4, Final, M4A. I hit Upload. A thin blue line tracked across the screen. The file, my voice narrating the time and place of my own assault, was now stored on a triple redundant, legally firewalled corporate server, hidden in plain sight. Step 4. The medical record. My body was an evidence source, and it needed to be documented with the same sterile precision as the rest. I opened the HealthFolio app on my tablet, the one Arcturus executives used for tracking wellness metrics for our insurance provider. I navigated to the Self-Reported Incident tab. A menu appeared. Date of incident, time of incident, location. The app automatically pulled the GPS coordinates from my tablet. Nature of injury. I selected blunt force trauma from a drop-down menu. Pain level. A slider appeared, numbered 1 to 10. I moved it to 7. Notes. In the text box, I typed, "Sustained single blow to right zygomatic bone from a closed fist. Perpetrator, Helene Cross. Incident occurred on front porch during a verbal altercation. I was concise, factual, emotionless." Finally, the app prompted, "Attach photo?" I switched to the tablet's front-facing camera. The face that looked back at me was a stranger's. My right eye was already beginning to swell shut. The skin beneath it a mottled, ugly canvas of purple and red. The small cut on my cheekbone was oozing slightly. I looked directly into the lens, my expression neutral. I took the picture. The flash was harsh and clinical. I attached the image to the report and hit Submit. A confirmation message appeared. "Your health incident report has been logged and timestamped. Another piece of data, locked in, geolocated, and filed away." Now, back to the Halo Bell portal. The moment of truth. I clicked on the event link. A video player loaded. I hit play. It was horrifyingly clear. The 4K resolution was unforgiving. It captured the scene in stark, clinical detail under the yellow porch light. There I was, turning away. There was Helene, her face a mask of fury, grabbing my wrist, the spin, the punch. The video was silent for a second. Then the high-fidelity audio kicked in, a feature Nora had praised. It had picked up the wet, cracking sound of the impact. It picked up my phone clattering on the stone. It picked up Helene's hissed whisper, "Don't you ever go against me again." And then, my own voice, shaky but clear, directed at my watch. 8:41 p.m., October 18th, Greyhaven. The video was everything I needed and more. It was a prosecutor's dream. It was an ethics committee's open and shut case. At the bottom of the video player were two buttons, share and download. I clicked download. A dialog box offered options. I downloaded the file twice. The first time, I chose download original file with full metadata. A 280 MB MP4 file began downloading. This was the pristine exhibit, the raw data. It contained the digital fingerprint of Nora's camera, the creation time, the GPS data encoded by the device, 100 tiny data points that would make it impossible to refute its authenticity. I saved it to the encrypted folder on my tablet. XHB Video Raw 2041. The second time, I chose Download for Presentation, watermarked. The system processed for a moment, then produced a slightly smaller file. This version was cleaner, stripped of the raw metadata, but with a subtle, transparent timestamp and the Halo Bell logo burned into the bottom right corner. This was the copy I would play in the boardroom. It looked official, unimpeachable. I saved it as XHB Video Presentation 2041, MP4. The primary evidence was now secured in triplicate, on Nora's cloud, on Nora's backup Hotmail account, and now, in two separate formats, on my own encrypted device. The machine needed to be primed. I opened my corporate messaging app. Signal. I found the name of the secretary for the ethics committee, a ruthlessly efficient administrative assistant named David Chen. He was a creature of pure process. My message was short and to the point. David, a potential Clause 12.4 triggering event has occurred. Please begin preliminary preparations for an emergency session, tentatively scheduled for Monday. 0900 hours. Await formal submission package from me. Confidential. I hit send. 2 gray check marks immediately turned blue. He had read it. His reply came 10 seconds later. Acknowledged. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for details. His job was to prepare the room, draft the notifications, and follow the procedure. The gears were now officially turning. One final piece, one last, unassailable layer of third-party validation. I needed an official record. I needed a case number. I used my tablet to make a VoIP call. I dialed 911. The voice on the other end was bored, tired. Greyhaven 911, what is your emergency? I kept my own voice level, calm. Hello? I need to report a minor domestic incident at 12 Crestline Drive. Is anyone injured? Do you require medical assistance? The injuries are minor, I said, my voice a carefully constructed monotone. I do not require an ambulance. Is the other party still there? Is there an active threat? The other party is in the residence. The altercation is over. There is no active threat. Okay, ma'am. Can you tell me what happened? There was a verbal disagreement that escalated. I was struck once in the face. I do not wish to press charges at this time. This was crucial. I didn't want a messy arrest. I wanted a clean report. I simply want the incident to be on record. I would like an officer to come and take a report, and I need an incident number for my records. There was a pause. This was not a typical call. People called 911 for help, for emergencies, not for clerical services. You just want a report number? The dispatcher asked, confused. Yes, I said firmly. That is correct. A formal, documented incident report. Please. Another pause, then the sound of typing. Okay, ma'am. I'm dispatching a car to your location. The officer will take your statement. Your case number for this incident is GPD 25-1018-0482. I wrote it down on a notepad on my desk. GPD 25-1018-0482. It was a beautiful string of numbers and letters. It was objective. It was official. It was a government-issued timestamp on Helene's violence. It was the final nail. "Thank you," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "I will be waiting outside for the officer." I disconnected the call. The evidence was gathered, the audio was synced, the video was downloaded, the medical data was logged, the committee was alerted, and the police were on their way to create the final, impartial piece of the mosaic. The foundation was built. Now, it was time to let the structure rise. The flashing blue and red lights of the Greyhaven police cruiser were an alien presence in Westmere Ridge. They pulsed silently, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the perfect lawns and the stone facades of the identical houses. No siren. That would have been a disturbance. I sat on the top step, the same step where my blood had spattered, and waited. When the officer, a young man with a tired face named Miller, approached, I stood up. He shone his flashlight on my face, and I didn't flinch. He let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's more than minor, ma'am." "It was a single strike," I said, my voice flat. "I'm fine." He looked from my swollen cheek to the grand, dark house behind me. "You said the other party is inside?" "Yes, my stepmother, Helene Cross." "And you don't want to press charges?" He sounded incredulous. "With all due respect, ma'am, that's assault." "I am aware of the legal definition, officer," I replied. "I am the head of compliance for a multinational corporation. I know what constitutes a chargeable offense. However, at this time, I do not wish to pursue a criminal complaint. I require a documented incident report. That is all." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mixture of confusion and professional weariness. He had likely expected tears, hysteria, a frantic victim. He got a corporate executive dictating terms. I gave him my statement with the same dispassionate clarity I would use to brief a board of directors. I described the verbal altercation, the location on the porch, the grab, the punch. I did not embellish. I did not offer emotional context. I presented the facts. "She hit you because of a PR budget?" he asked, pausing his note-taking. "The budget was the catalyst, not the cause," I said. He just nodded slowly and kept writing. When he was done, he handed me a slip of paper with the case number I already had. "The report will be filed by morning," he said. "If you change your mind about pressing charges, you have that number. And ma'am, you should probably get some ice on that." "Thank you, officer. I will." I watched him walk back to his car. The silent, strobing lights swept across the street one last time before he killed them, plunging the neighborhood back into its curated, yellow-lit tranquility. The spectacle was over. The official record was made. I went back inside, locking the door, and walked not to the kitchen for ice, but to my father's study. The room smelled of him, old books, leather, and the faint, peppery scent of the cologne he wore. This was his sanctuary, the place he retreated to after his long trips, and it was here that he kept the family safe. My father, Graham Mercer, is a brilliant man. He can dissect a hostile takeover bid in his sleep and spot a flaw in a structural engineering blueprint from 100 yards away, but at home, he craves a simplicity that borders on willful ignorance. After my mother died, our lives were chaotic, fractured. Then Helene arrived, 5 years ago, with her perfect posture, her organized social calendar, and her genius for creating a smooth, frictionless domestic surface. "She stabilized the family," he would say, with a look of genuine gratitude. What he meant was that she managed the noise. She handled the caterers and the school donations and the HOA disputes. She presented him with a peaceful, orderly home life when he returned, exhausted. From his business trips, he never looked beneath the surface she so carefully polished. He didn't want to. He saw her as the solution, the steady hand that allowed him to focus on building his empire. He never saw her as the problem, because the problem was quiet. Last year, the problem was not quiet. It was a sharp, percussive sound in the main stairwell. She had been angry about something trivial. I had corrected a factual error she'd made in a speech she was preparing. She confronted me at the top of the stairs, her voice a low hiss. I had turned to walk away, just as I had tonight, and she had shoved me, hard, between the shoulder blades. It wasn't a murderous push. It was a push of dominance, of casual cruelty. I tumbled down 4 steps, landing in a heap on the mid-stair landing. The pain was a bright, shocking flare in my hip and shoulder. There was no camera in the stairwell. There were no witnesses. When my father came home 2 days later, I showed him the bruise, a deep, ugly purple bloom on my hip. "My God, Sloane, what happened?" he'd asked, his face a mask of concern. "Helene pushed me down the stairs," I said, my voice shaking then, raw with a pain and anger I couldn't control. Helene, who had been standing in the doorway, began to cry. Soft, delicate, wounded tears. "Graham, I can't believe she'd say that." She'd sobbed. "She tripped. I tried to catch her. She fell." It was my word against hers, a shaking, furious daughter versus a weeping, maternal wife. He looked from my face to hers. He looked at the bruise, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. I saw him choose. "Sloane," he'd said, his voice gentle, disappointed. "Accidents happen. Let's not make this into something it isn't. Apologize to Helene. You've upset her." In that moment, I understood. My evidence was my body, and my body was unreliable. My testimony was my voice, and my voice was emotional. Suspect. The history of that moment was written in my word against hers, and hers was the one that made his life easier. The bruise faded within a week. The incident was officially erased, relegated to the category of Sloane being difficult. The next day, I used my personal credit card to pay for 2 things. The first was a 6-week advanced self-defense course that focused on breaking holds and managing physical confrontations. The second was a 2-hour consultation with one of the top domestic violence litigators in the state. I didn't want to sue. I wanted to understand the mechanics of evidence. Without a third-party witness or a recording, the lawyer had told me, her office stark and modern. "A judge sees what your father saw. A family dispute. It's an evidentiary stalemate." I took the pamphlets she gave me, the printouts of legal statutes, and the invoice from the self-defense course. I went to the bank, accessed my safe deposit box, and I sealed them in a large manila envelope. I created a file. I started a record. Because I remembered the last lucid phone call I had with my mother, a week before the cancer took her voice for good. I had been complaining about some college drama, some perceived injustice. Her own voice was weak, a rasping whisper through the receiver, but her words were steel. "Sloane," she had said, and I can still hear the effort in her breath. "Listen to me. The world doesn't listen to a woman's screams. They call it hysteria. Don't fight back with screams. Baby girl, you fight back with records. You build a case. You document everything. You make the truth so heavy, so dense with facts, that it cannot be dismissed." Tonight, Nora Dalrymple's camera was my third-party witness. The Halo Bell Pro 4K was my record. The truth was no longer a fading bruise on my hip. It was a 280 megabyte video file with full metadata. History was no longer written by Helene's tears and my father's desire for a quiet life. It was now written in 4K resolution, logged in a police report, and time-stamped in a corporate health filing. I looked at the clock on the study wall. 8:59 p.m. 1 minute. I had submitted the paperwork for Appendix C7 with a time-delayed release flag, a simple instruction in the digital submission portal, marked for the attention of the acting CEO. Mark Redding. Mark was a man of process, not sentiment. He had no loyalty to Helene. He had a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. The flag was set to activate at 9 p.m. on Friday, the day after the merger was signed. The email containing the final, signed version of the agreement, with my appendix highlighted by a digital notation, would land at the top of his inbox with a high-importance flag. It would be the first thing he saw when he did his end-of-day review. The system was automated, impersonal. It would bypass my father completely. The chain of command, in his absence, would follow the protocol I had written. The second hand on the clock swept upwards. Helene's history of private violence, of unprovable acts and whispered threats, was about to become an official, documented, and actionable corporate liability. The clock struck 9. The quiet, elegant chime filled the study. Somewhere across the country, on a server farm in a windowless building, an email was dispatched, a digital flag was raised, a process was initiated. I would not give my father the chance to choose. I would not stand before him again, asking to be believed. I was going to end this, and I was going to end it before his plane even touched the ground. Saturday morning at the Westmere Community Center tasted like stale coffee and regret. The air was thick with the scent of industrial-grade carpet cleaner, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the sugary promise of a pink and orange box of Dunkin' Donuts on a folding table. This was the stage for our quarterly HOA meeting, the pinnacle of suburban civic engagement. About 30 of my neighbors were scattered among the stacked plastic chairs, clutching ceramic mugs and styrofoam cups. They were talking in low, respectable murmurs about property lines, the new pickleball court resurfacing, and the unseasonable warmth. It was a tableau of peaceful, prosperous community life. Helene was already there, of course. She was holding court near the coffee urn, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere sweater set and tailored slacks. She looked rested, confident, and magnanimous. She laughed at a joke told by Bill Peterson, the HOA president, her head tilted back just so. She was the queen in her element, the benevolent ruler of Crestline Drive. She hadn't spoken a word to me since she'd bolted the door 2 nights ago. She was acting as if nothing had happened, a time-honored tradition among abusers everywhere. She glanced over and saw me as I signed the attendance sheet. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed her face before it was replaced by a cool, dismissive smile, a smile that said, "You are nothing." That was nothing. I took a seat in the back row. The right side of my face ached with a deep, bone-level throb. I had spent 20 minutes that morning with a professional-grade concealer palette, layering green color corrector over the deep purple of the bruise, followed by a thick, opaque foundation. From a distance, in the flat, unforgiving light of this room, it was probably unnoticeable, but up close, a subtle, yellow-green shadow remained under the makeup, a ghost of the truth. Bill Peterson, a retired orthodontist who clung to Robert's Rules of Order like a holy text, called the meeting to order at precisely 10:05 a.m. We plodded through the agenda, approval of the previous meeting's minutes, the treasurer's report, a lengthy and mind-numbing debate about the approved color palette for mailbox posts. Helene spoke eloquently on the mailbox issue, advocating for a more historically sensitive shade of forest green. People nodded. They were listening to a leader. Finally, Bill got to the last item before new business. Agenda item 7, neighborhood security. He looked over his glasses. Any new security concerns? Silence. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. This was my moment. I raised my hand. Bill squinted toward the back. Yes, Ms. Mercer? He rarely remembered my first name. To him, I was an extension of my father. Thank you. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice calm and even. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel Helene's gaze, sharp and hot, on my back. I'd like to address the board and the community regarding a recent security incident that I believe affects us all. An incident? Bill asked. His interest piqued. Was there a break-in? Not a break-in, I said. It concerns an act of violence that occurred on a front porch here in Westmere. A nervous murmur rippled through the room. Violence was a foreign concept here, something that happened in other towns, on the news. I believe, I continued, that for the safety and awareness of the community, it's important to see the nature of the threat. With the board's permission, I would like to show a brief video clip of the incident. It is under 2 minutes long. Helene stood up. Bill, I must object, she said, her voice dripping with reasonable concern. This is highly irregular. A neighborhood meeting is not the place to air personal disputes, whatever this is about. It's a private matter. It's inappropriate. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Helene was the voice of decorum, of reason. It took place on a front porch, in full view of the street. "Helene," I said, not looking at her, but keeping my eyes on Bill Peterson. "That makes it a community concern, not a private one." "This feels like an ambush," Helene said, her voice rising slightly. "It's a violation of privacy." "Mr. Peterson," I said, cutting through her protest. "The Westmere HOA bylaws, Article 4, Section 3, stipulate that any resident may present relevant materials, including photographic or video evidence, pertaining to a verifiable threat to community safety or property during the security portion of the agenda. This is a verifiable threat to safety." Bill blinked. I had quoted the bylaws. I had invoked the sacred text. He was a man of process, and I had just given him a clear, procedural path. He cleared his throat. "Well, the bylaws are quite clear. If the material pertains to community safety, the objection is overruled. Ms. Mercer, you may proceed." Helene shot me a look of pure venom. She sat down, her back ramrod straight, her knuckles white where she gripped the plastic armrest of her chair. I walked to the front of the room, where a small projector was aimed at a pull-down screen. I connected my tablet, a few clicks, and the presentation-ready video file was open. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The image was shockingly clear. The front of my house, illuminated in the pale yellow light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the figures of Helene and me appeared. The room was silent. They watched me turn away. They watched Helene grab my wrist. A collective gasp went through the room. Then came the punch. The 4K video, projected 8 feet high, was brutal and intimate. The sound, captured by the Halo Bell's microphone, was sickeningly clear. The sharp, wet crack of knuckles on bone. The clatter of my phone hitting the stone. Then, Helene's voice, a venomous whisper, filled the community center, as clear as if she were speaking into a microphone. "Don't you ever go against me again." The room was frozen. No one breathed. "Stop it," Helene screamed, her voice cracking. "Stop it right now." She lunged from her chair, rushing toward the table, her hand outstretched to kill the power strip. "Mrs. Cross, sit down." Bill Peterson's voice boomed, suddenly authoritative. "This is an official proceeding." Helene froze, her face a mask of panicked rage. On the screen, my own battered, on-screen self spoke, my voice shaky but audible. 8:41 p.m., October 18th, Greyhaven. I stopped the video and turned to face the room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the projector's fan. My neighbors were staring, their faces pale with shock. They looked from the frozen image of my bruised face on the screen to me, standing before them. They were finally seeing the truth beneath the concealer. That was your front porch?" Someone whispered from the middle row. Before I could answer, Nora Dalrymple stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "It was recorded by my doorbell camera," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The Halo Bell Pro. The file was automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server, and a backup was emailed to me simultaneously. The file's metadata is intact. It has not been altered." She was speaking with the authority of a tech support specialist, proud of her system's flawless performance. She was not a crusader. She was simply a witness, testifying on behalf of her machine. Helene stared at Nora, her mouth opening and closing silently. Betrayal was written all over her face. Then, a man in the front row, a quiet tax attorney named George, spoke up. "My son," he said slowly, looking at me with a new, horrified respect. "Works in the district attorney's office, the violent crimes unit. Would they be interested in a copy of that?" "Perhaps," I said, "but that's not why I'm here today." I turned my attention back to the silent, staring room. My audience was captive. Every phone was now held up, discreetly recording. I had their full attention. My stepmother, as many of you know, is the Senior Vice President of External Affairs for Arcturus Dynamics, I began, my voice even, projecting to the back of the room. The company has a strict code of conduct. Last week, in a merger agreement with another company, a new clause was ratified, Clause 12.4. I held up my own phone and read from the screen slowly, enunciating every word for the recording devices. It states that any senior executive found to be involved in a verifiable act of domestic violence, assault, or physical intimidation is subject to an immediate non-discretionary ethics review and potential termination for cause. I lowered the phone. The clause further specifies, I continued, that for the review to be automatically triggered, the evidence must consist of verifiable, time-stamped evidence consisting of both moving visual imagery and corresponding audio, captured by a third-party or public-facing device in a public or semi-public space. I paused, letting the words hang in the stale, coffee-scented air. What you have just witnessed, I said, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity, is not just a family matter, it is a significant motion event. It is Exhibit A in a corporate ethics investigation. It is the fulfillment of every evidentiary requirement I wrote into that contract. Helene finally found her voice. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. You think this little stunt, this public humiliation, is going to do anything? You are a pathetic, vindictive child. She was still performing, still trying to control the narrative, but she wasn't looking at the faces of her neighbors. I saw the shift. I saw the dawning understanding. They weren't looking at a family drama anymore. They were looking at a woman who had just been expertly and publicly cornered by a system of her own making. They were looking at me, not as a victim, but as the architect of that system. The sympathy in their eyes was being replaced by something else. Awe, fear. Helene looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. You will regret this, she hissed. But her audience was gone. The jury of her peers, the carefully cultivated court of Westmere Ridge, had already rendered its verdict. She just couldn't see it yet. The social world she had so meticulously built had just collapsed, and she was the only one left standing in the rubble. I did not stay for the donuts. I did not engage in the frantic, whispered conversations that erupted in the wake of my presentation. I simply disconnected my tablet, packed it in my bag, and walked out of the community center, leaving the social wreckage for them to sift through. Helene remained frozen in her chair, a statue of incandescent rage. She was irrelevant now. The public trial was over. The corporate execution was about to begin. Back in my home office, the process was methodical. It was a sequence of commands, executed in a precise order. Emotion was a variable that had been eliminated from the equation. Action Item 1. Compile and submit formal complaint. I opened the Arcturus Dynamics Ethics Committee submission portal. It was a stark, web-based interface I had designed myself for simplicity and security. A series of fields appeared. Complainant: Sloan Mercer, Head of Compliance. Subject of complaint: Helene Cross, SVP External Affairs. Relevant bylaw clause: Clause 12.4, Arcturus West Point Merger Agreement. Summary of allegation: a verifiable act of assault, as defined in Appendix C set. Then came the evidence upload module. I created a single, compressed, encrypted archive file. The contents were cataloged with sterile, legalistic precision. Exhibit A, XJ Biological 2041, HEEK. Live photo of blood evidence on a semi-public walkway, with residence number visible for geolocation confirmation. Exhibit B, XHB Video RAW 2041, MP4, unaltered 4K video file with full metadata, sourced from a third-party device. Exhibit C, VACCT Logistics Call Q4, Final, M4A, time-stamped environmental audio recording corroborating events depicted in Exhibit B. Exhibit D, Healthfolio Incident Report, smrcer101825.pdf. Timestamped. Geolocated medical self-report with photographic evidence of injury. Exhibit E. GPD Report 251180482.pdf. Scanned copy of the official police incident report, confirming a formal record of the event. The file was 312 megabytes. I dragged it into the upload box. A progress bar filled. When it was complete, a final, ominous checkbox appeared. I certify that the information provided is true and accurate, and I understand that this submission is final and cannot be retracted. I clicked the box. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. A new message appeared in clean, sans serif font. Submission received. Case EC FY250114. Your submission meets the evidentiary requirements of Appendix C7. A non-discretionary review has been initiated. The Ethics Committee has been notified. An emergency session has been confirmed for Monday, October 20th, 0900 hours, EST. The first switch had been flipped. The machine was on. System Response 1. Automated Notification Cascade. At that exact moment, 7 identical emails were dispatched from the server. They went to the 6 other members of the Ethics Committee, a collection of senior managers and 1 independent board member, and to the company's general counsel, Arthur Vance. The email contained the case number and a secure link to download the evidence package. My own email pinged with a copy of the notification. The process was working as designed. System Response 2. Legal Department Protocol initiated. It took Arthur Vance, a man who billed at $2,200 an hour and valued efficiency above all else, exactly 15 minutes to review the core evidence. His response was not emotional. It was a risk mitigation calculation. A senior executive, on video, committing assault. 2 days after signing a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, the liability was catastrophic. At 11:47 a.m., a new email arrived in my inbox. It was from Arthur. It was CC'd to the acting CEO, Mark Redding, and the head of human resources. Subject: Interim Action. Helene Cross. All. In light of the evidence submitted in Case EC FY25-4, and in accordance with the provisions of the Arcturus Dynamics Executive Employment Agreement, Section 8, I am placing Helene Cross on immediate, temporary administrative leave, pending the outcome of the Ethics Committee review on Monday. Her access to all company systems, premises, and communication channels will be revoked, effective immediately. This is a non-discretionary action to protect the interests of the corporation. A formal notification is being drafted for Mrs. Cross. Arthur Vance, General Counsel. Another switch flipped. The Queen had been removed from the board, temporarily, for now, but the process was in motion. System Response 3. Corporate Communications Protocol initiated. Arthur's email triggered the next cascade. The acting CEO, Mark Redding, replied all to Arthur's message within 5 minutes, adding our head of corporate communications, Maria Jenkins. Maria. We have a potential crisis. I want a proactive internal communications strategy drafted by EOD. We need to get ahead of this. We control the narrative. Maria Jenkins was a pragmatist. She dealt in optics, not morals. I received a call from her an hour later. Sloan, she said, her voice brisk, no preamble. I've seen the video. This is clean. From a comms perspective, messy, but clean. What's your recommendation? I asked. We frame it as a swift and decisive commitment to our values. We can't let this leak. An internal memo needs to go out to all employees, VPs and above, by midday tomorrow. We announce an executive is on leave pending an investigation into a violation of our code of conduct. We reinforce our corporate values, no names yet. Just a clear message that we take these things seriously. What kind of message? There was a pause, and the sound of typing. I'm looking at the talking points from the Values Forward campaign from last year, she said. The one Helene herself spearheaded after the West Point CFO scandal. The language is perfect. I knew the language. I had reviewed it. You mean the zero-tolerance policy? I asked, my voice flat. Exactly, Maria said, oblivious to the irony. We have a zero-tolerance policy for conduct that violates our core principles of integrity and respect. We'll use her own words. It's airtight. Another switch. Helene's own PR campaign was being weaponized against her. System response 4. Partner company protocol initiated. Sunday morning, the internal memo was scheduled to deploy at 11:00 a.m., but at 9:15 a.m., a new, far more dangerous fire erupted. A formal letter, sent via encrypted courier from the General Counsel of West Point Labs, arrived in Mark Redding's inbox. He forwarded it to me and Arthur Vance immediately. The letter was cold, brutal, and entirely predictable. Mr. Redding, we have been made aware via informal channels of a significant ethics complaint leveled against a senior Arcturus executive integral to our recent merger agreement. We have also been made aware of video evidence that appears to substantiate this complaint. Pursuant to the merger agreement, Clause 18.2, Material Adverse Change, and Clause 12.4, Executive Conduct. West Point Labs hereby formally notifies Arcturus Dynamics that this constitutes a potential breach of contract. As per the penalty subclause 12.4b, if the executive in question is not permanently removed from their position within 48 hours of the Ethics Committee's formal review, West Point Labs reserves the right to seek damages and potentially void the merger agreement entirely. We await your swift and decisive action in this matter. The complaint was no longer just a PR problem or an HR issue. It was now a $30 billion threat. The clock was ticking, and it was a clock West Point had just set. System Response 5. External Agency Protocol Initiated. My work tablet buzzed. It was an email from a detective with the Greyhaven Police Department, a name I recognized from the bottom of the incident report. George's son. Ms. Mercer. My office has been made aware of a video recording related to incident GPD 25-1018-0482. We understand you were reluctant to press charges at the time, but this video may constitute sufficient evidence for the state to pursue a case for assault, regardless of your wishes. Would you be willing to provide a formal, on-the-record statement and submit the video as evidence? I typed my reply. Detective. Yes. You are authorized to proceed. Please let me know when you require my statement. I hit send. The final, external gear was now engaged. This was no longer just a corporate matter, it was a criminal one. System Response 6. Legacy System Interrupt. Late Sunday afternoon. My personal cell phone, a cheap, new burner I'd bought for cash that morning, rang. The number was blocked. I answered. The line was crackling. The connection poor, but the voice was unmistakable. It was my father. Sloan? His voice was heavy, weighted down with a weariness that went beyond jet lag. He must have gotten to a place with reception. Someone must have called him. I'm here, I said. What is going on? He demanded, his voice a low rumble. Mark Redding called me. Arthur Vance. They're talking about an incident, about Helene. They're saying you filed a complaint. What did you do? The question hung in the air. What did you do? Not, what did she do? Not, are you okay? The old anger, the ghost of the girl crying on the stairs, flickered inside me. I extinguished it. That girl was not relevant to this process. I submitted a formal ethics complaint, as per corporate protocol, I said, my voice as steady and even as the hum of a server. The complaint is supported by irrefutable time-stamped video evidence. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on his end. Video? Evidence? He repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. Yes, I said. High-definition video and audio of the assault. A burst of static erupted on the line. His voice came back, broken and distant. Not possible. A misunderstanding. The process is already in motion, I said, cutting him off. It is a non-discretionary protocol, a protocol you signed. The line crackled again, A sound like a dying fire. Then, silence. The call had dropped. He had heard the word that changed everything. Video. The word that negated any possibility of misunderstanding. The word that made his choice for him. I stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down. The chain reaction was now complete. It had moved beyond the realm of family dynamics, beyond appeals to loyalty, beyond emotion. It was a machine, running on the cold, clean fuel of contractual obligations, corporate bylaws, and verifiable data. It was a process they had all signed, and it was a process that could not be stopped. When Arthur Vance, our general counsel, placed Helene on administrative leave, he didn't just revoke her keycard, he triggered IT Security Protocol 77B, the standard procedure for a high-risk executive separation. This protocol involves the immediate, wholesale imaging of the executive's email account, cloud storage, and all company-issued devices. It's done to preserve corporate assets and protect against sabotage or data theft. It is not technically an investigation. It is a data preservation measure, but in my line of work, the difference is purely semantic. On Sunday afternoon, as my father was failing to reach me from a dead zone, a senior IT security analyst named Ben was running a keyword filter on the 85-gigabyte image of Helene's corporate Outlook account. The filters weren't for assault or abuse. They were for terms like journalist, reporter, off the record, and the names of our key competitors. They were looking for leaks. Ben found something else. At 4:32 p.m., my tablet pinged with a secure message from Arthur Vance. It was a single-line directive. "Call me, secure line, now." I dialed his private number. He answered on the first ring. "Sloan," he said, his voice stripped of all pleasantries. "The assault charge is the least of our problems. It just pulled a draft email from Helene's outbox. It's addressed to a reporter at the Greyhaven Gazette." "A leak about the merger?" I asked. "No," Arthur said. The line was silent for a beat. "It's a leak about you." He forwarded me the file. It was a draft email, saved at 8:15 p.m. on Friday, just 30 minutes before she attacked me. It was a long, rambling, off-the-record background email. It painted a picture of me, Sloan Mercer, as a troubled and unstable presence within Arcturus. It detailed my fixation on the West Point merger, my erratic behavior, and my history of conflict with senior management. It was a preemptive strike, a carefully crafted narrative designed to discredit me if I ever became a problem. "She was preparing to paint you as hysterical and unreliable," Arthur said, his voice cold with fury. "If you had filed a complaint without that video, this email would have been on the front page by Monday morning. She was laying a trap. The Gazette reporter is her cousin." But that wasn't all. The IT analyst, now justifiably spooked, expanded his search. He cross-referenced the recipient list of her external affairs budget reports with the company's vendor database. He was looking for irregularities. He found a shell. A nonprofit organization called the Greyhaven Civic Betterment Fund had received quarterly discretionary donations from Helene's PR budget, totaling over $400,000 in the last fiscal year. The fund's stated purpose was promoting community engagement. It took the analyst 10 minutes to pull the incorporation papers for the fund. The sole director and signatory on the bank account was a man named Philip Cross, Helene's brother. "She's been embezzling," Arthur stated. It wasn't a question. "She's been laundering corporate money through a shell company run by her brother." This was the expenditure I had flagged. This was the questionable documentation that had triggered her rage. It wasn't about a simple PR budget. It was about me, the head of compliance, getting too close to her personal slush fund. The assault was not just an act of impulsive anger. It was an attempt to silence an auditor. It was witness intimidation. Suddenly, the whole incident on the porch was recast. It was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a violent cover-up of a federal crime. I hung up with Arthur and pulled up the video file. XHB Video Raw 2041.mp4. I had watched it a dozen times, focusing on the action, the words, the impact. Now, I watched it for something else. I watched it with the knowledge of the embezzlement. I put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones and turned the volume all the way up. I played the section right before the punch, where she grabs my wrist. Her voice is a low hiss. "You think you're so smart. Your job is to support me." But in the background, underneath her words, I heard something. A car door slammed across the street, and in that brief pocket of quiet, Helene's hissing voice said something I had missed completely. It was a fragment, sharp and vicious. "Ruin the deal. Understand?" My blood went cold. I had assumed she was talking about the PR deal, the budget, but the embezzlement scheme was tied to the merger. The West Point merger meant expanded budgets, less oversight, a bigger pot to steal from. My flagging of her expenses was a threat to her funding, but it was also a threat to the deal. She wasn't just angry about my auditing. She was terrified I would discover the fraud and use it to scuttle the merger she was counting on. Don't ruin the deal. But there was another layer. I opened my encrypted corporate message client and pulled up the chat logs from the final merger negotiations. 2 weeks ago, there was a brief, contentious point about Clause 12.4. I had insisted on the non-discretionary language. The West Point legal team had pushed back, wanting a loophole, a mutual consent clause. Then, suddenly, they had conceded. The objection was dropped overnight. I had assumed my legal argument was just that persuasive. Now, I looked at the name of the West Point executive who had formally withdrawn the objection, a VP of operations named Michael Cade. I ran a cross-reference, Michael Cade and Helene Cross. My secure search protocol scoured public records, social media, and internal travel logs. It took 4 minutes. I found a text message, captured from Helene's company phone during the data preservation sweep. It was from Michael Cade, sent the night before West Point conceded on the clause. "Cade, this non-discretionary language is a problem. My people are spooked." "Helene, don't worry about it. It's an internal compliance matter. It's aimed at her, not you. I'll handle Sloan. You just get the language adjusted on your end." "Cade, what language?" "Helene, the vendor audits. Section 9. We need the threshold for automatic review raised to 500K, not 250K. Make that happen, and I'll make my problem go away." My breath hitched. They were colluding. Helene wasn't just embezzling from Arcturus. She was conspiring with an executive at West Point to weaken the merger's financial audit controls, likely to cover his own malfeasance, in exchange for him helping her push back on my ethics clause. When he failed to stop my clause, she moved to Plan B, discredit me, then remove me. Her punch was not an act of passion. It was a failed business transaction. As I was processing this, a new email pinged my tablet. It was from Nora Dalrymple. Subject: another clip. "Sloan, dear, I was going through my Halo Bell archive just to make sure I had everything for you, and I found another significant motion event from last week. It's from Tuesday. I thought it was just a mail delivery, but I saw Helene. It's very strange. She picks up a package from the postman. Then, after he leaves, she just throws a handful of papers down the storm drain by the curb. I thought it might be important. I've attached the file. Hope you're feeling better. Nora." I downloaded the clip. There, in the bright, clear light of Tuesday afternoon, was Helene. She was sorting the mail on the porch. She separated a large, stiff priority mail envelope, looked around, and then walked quickly to the curb. She pulled a sheaf of documents from the envelope and methodically, almost casually, shoved them through the grate of the storm drain. I recognized the return address on the envelope she was still holding. It was from our corporate insurance carrier. I went back to the IT archive. I searched Helene's deleted items for insurance. I found it. A week ago, Helene had filed a property loss claim against our homeowner's policy, a rider that was paid for by Arcturus as part of her executive compensation package. She had claimed a collection of antique jewelry had been stolen from the house. The estimated value? $150,000. The claim was pending. I remembered last weekend. I had seen Helene loading several hard-sided Pelican cases into the trunk of her car. I'd assumed it was for the charity gala. But now, checking the geotag on a photo I'd taken that day, I realized where she was. She wasn't at the gala. She was parked in front of her brother's garage. The stolen jewelry was sitting in Philip Cross's house. The paperwork she was stuffing down the drain was likely the original appraisal, or perhaps a letter from the insurer, evidence that contradicted the claim she was filing. She was committing insurance fraud. This was the final piece. The assault was the key that unlocked the door. Behind it was a house of cards, a conspiracy of embezzlement, collusion, and wire fraud, all built on a foundation of mundane, suburban greed. Every piece of data was a steel pin locking her in place. The Halo Bell clip was the linchpin, but the case was now a fortress. On Sunday evening, at 7 p.m., my burner phone rang. It was an unknown number, a white shoe law firm in downtown Greyhaven. It was Helene's new, very expensive lawyer. Ms. Mercer, the man's voice was smooth, like oiled wood. I represent Helene Cross. We find ourselves in an unfortunate situation, a family matter that has been dreadfully misunderstood. It is not a family matter, I said. It is case number ECFY250114. He cleared his throat. Look, my client is prepared to be reasonable. We can resolve this quietly, a private settlement. Helene would, of course, agree to step down from Arcturus, citing personal reasons. In return, the video is buried, the complaint is withdrawn, and we all move on. No one needs to be harmed by this. A quiet negotiation, a non-disclosure agreement, a dignified exit. This was the way her world worked. This was the off-ramp she had always been able to buy. I think you're confusing me with someone who negotiates, I said. You should read the merger agreement, specifically Clause 12.4 and Appendix C7. The clause? He asked, his voice losing a fraction of its smoothness. It's a non-discretionary protocol, I said, the words tasting like cold steel. The complaint has been filed. The evidence has been certified. The process is automated. There is no withdraw button. There is no negotiate option. There is no off switch. A long, heavy silence filled the line. He was realizing, far too late, that he had brought a checkbook to a gunfight. The Ethics Committee, I continued, meets tomorrow morning at 9. I suggest you and your client be there. I hung up the phone. The conference room on the 27th floor of the Arcturus Tower is a glass box in the sky. 3 walls are floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, indifferent view of Greyhaven and the silver ribbon of the river beyond. The 4th wall is frosted glass, hiding nothing. The long table is a single, massive slab of polished obsidian, reflecting the cold, recessed lighting from the ceiling. It is a room designed for transparency, for deals where nothing can be hidden. It is a perfect venue for an execution. I sat at the head of the table. As chairperson of the Ethics Committee, the position was mine by right. To my left and right sat the other 6 members of the committee, their faces grim, their tablets glowing in the dim light. At the far end of the table sat Helene and her lawyer, a man with a tired suit and the haunted eyes of someone who knows he is being paid to witness a foregone conclusion. Helene was pale, the bravado from the HOA meeting gone, replaced by a brittle, defiant tension. She looked at me with an expression of pure, distilled hatred. The acting CEO, Mark Redding, and our general counsel, Arthur Vance, sat to my immediate right. They were not committee members, but their presence was required. They were here to represent the $30 billion merger that was currently hanging by a thread. It was precisely 9 a.m. I tapped the screen of my tablet. This special session of the Arcturus Dynamics Ethics Committee is now in order, I said, my voice amplified slightly by the conference phone in the center of the table. The sound was flat, devoid of echo. We are here to conduct a non-discretionary review of case number ECFY2514, concerning an allegation of a violation of Clause 12.4 of the Arcturus West Point merger agreement by Senior Vice President Helene Cross. I looked directly at Helene. The evidentiary package was distributed to all members yesterday. I will now play the primary evidence for the record. I tapped my screen again, the 85-inch monitor on the wall, which normally displayed market analytics, flickered to life. The pale yellow light of my own front porch filled the room. No one spoke as the video played. The silent grab, the spin, the brutal, audible crack of the punch echoed in the soundproofed room. Helene's hissed threat was as clear as a courtroom testimony. My own shaky voice reciting the date and time was a damning narration. I let the video play to its end, then froze the image on the moment of impact. Helene's fist blurred in motion, my head snapping back, the porch light catching the shock and pain on my face. The image was massive, undeniable, a piece of corporate art documenting a violent crime. "The committee," I stated, "is also in receipt of the corresponding police incident report, a time-stamped medical filing, and corroborating audio. Before we proceed, I will play a second, related clip." I played Nora Dalrymple's video, the image of Helene, 2 days before the assault, methodically stuffing documents into a storm drain, was mundane and bizarre. It was a perfect portrait of someone hiding something. I stopped the second video and brought up a final document on the screen. It was a scan of Appendix C7. For the record," I said, my voice level, "I will read the controlling language of the evidentiary requirement that triggered this meeting." I read the paragraph aloud, slowly, every word a hammer blow. "Verifiable, time-stamped evidence, consisting of both moving visual imagery and corresponding audio, captured by a third-party or public-facing device." When I finished, I tapped the screen one more time. A close-up of the signature page of the merger agreement appeared. Helene's elegant, looping signature was magnified, next to a digital timestamp from the previous week. "This agreement, and this specific appendix, were reviewed and personally ratified by Mrs. Cross," I said. I leaned back in my chair. "The floor is now open." Helene's lawyer stood up, shuffling his papers. "Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee," he began, his voice raspy, "my client asserts that this is a gross misrepresentation of a private family dispute. The primary video evidence is misleading. The angle of the camera, the lighting, it creates an illusion of violence that is far from the reality of the moment." Helene chimed in, her voice shrill with desperation. "He's right. It was a misunderstanding. She was hysterical. I was trying to restrain her. The camera angle is a lie. It's a trick." "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, gaining a sliver of confidence, "this recording was made without my client's consent. It is an illegal wiretap, an invasion of her privacy. It is inadmissible as evidence, both in a court of law and, we contend, in this boardroom." He sat down, looking relieved to have finished his speech. I turned my gaze to Arthur Vance. "Arthur, your legal opinion on the admissibility of the evidence?" Our general counsel did not stand. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the obsidian table. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice a low, powerful baritone that commanded attention. "Regarding the claim of an illegal recordings, counsel is mistaken. The state of Connecticut is a one-party consent state for audio recordings. However, that is irrelevant here." He looked at Helene's lawyer. "The precedent in this jurisdiction is clear and was set last year in Gray County Vise. Peterson, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy on a front porch. It is a semi-public space. The video was captured by a third-party device not party to the conversation. It is not a wiretap. It is a security recording. As for its admissibility here, this is not a court of law. This is a corporate ethics review, governed by a private contract which Mrs. Cross signed. The contract stipulates that such evidence is not only admissible but is, in fact, the trigger for this very meeting. The evidence is valid." Arthur's words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. He had not just refuted the argument, he had dismantled it, piece by piece, with cold, legal precision. Before Helene or her lawyer could respond, the conference phone in the center of the table chirped. My assistant's voice filled the room. Madam Chairwoman, the General Counsel for West Point Labs is on the line for you, as scheduled. Patch him through, I said. A new face appeared on the giant monitor. Next to the frozen image of the assault, it was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and a grim expression. Good morning, he said, his voice tinny through the speakers. I'll be brief. West Point has reviewed the evidence related to your case EC FY 25-0114. We find it to be a clear and unambiguous violation of Clause 12.4. This constitutes a material adverse change that puts the merger at risk. He looked directly into the camera. As per our rights under the contract, West Point formally demands that Arcturus Dynamics cure this breach. We require the permanent removal of the executive in question within 24 hours of your committee's ruling. If you fail to do so, we will trigger the penalty clause, and all options, including the dissolution of the merger agreement, will be on the table. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. We will not be associated with this. Thank you. The screen went blank. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. The problem was no longer abstract. It now had a price tag, $30 billion and a 24-hour deadline. And then, the frosted glass door to the conference room opened. My father walked in. He looked as if he had aged 10 years since I'd last seen him. His suit was rumpled from a red-eye flight, his face pale and drawn. He didn't look at the committee members. He didn't look at the lawyers. His eyes found mine first. I saw in them a universe of confusion, pain, and a deep, gut-wrenching shame. Then, he looked at Helene. She stared back at him, her face a silent, desperate plea. A plea to be saved, to be protected, to have him rewrite the reality of the situation. Finally, his gaze lifted to the 85-inch screen on the wall. He stared at the frozen, high-definition image of his wife's fist against his daughter's face. He stood there, silent. A man watching a replay of a failure he hadn't even known was happening. His silence was an abdication. He was not here to intervene. He was here to witness the consequences. I reached down and picked up a plain gray legal-sized envelope from my briefcase. I slid it across the polished obsidian table. It glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of the acting CEO, Mark Redding. What is this? Mark asked. As head of compliance, it is my duty to prepare for contingencies that may affect executive continuity, I said, my voice steady. That envelope contains the signed, temporary, and immediately effective appointment contract for the new acting head of external affairs. It is the succession plan, ready for activation. Checkmate. I looked around the table at the faces of the committee members. Their expressions were grim, but resolute. There was no doubt. There was no debate. I call for a vote, I said. All in favor of accepting the findings of Case EC FY 25-4 and recommending the immediate termination of Helene Cross for cause, as stipulated in Clause 12.4. 7 hands went up around the table, including my own. I tapped my tablet one last time, bringing up the pre-written minutes of the meeting. I read the final, binding resolution into the record, my voice clear and cold in the silent, glass room. The motion carries unanimously. The official minutes will record the following. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented, the committee finds Helene Cross in breach of contract and corporate ethics. Recommendation is for immediate termination for cause. Activate the succession plan as prepared by the head of compliance. The full evidentiary file is to be turned over to the relevant law enforcement authorities for their own investigation. I looked up from the screen, my gaze sweeping past my father's ashen face, and settled on Helene. The process is complete. No one moved. The resolution hung in the silent, refrigerated air of the glass box. Helene stared at me, her face a canvas of disbelief slowly curdling into a dark, final understanding. The system had no override. The machine had no heart. Her lawyer, a man defeated not by argument but by an algorithm, quietly began to pack his leather briefcase. The soft clicks of the brass latches were the only sounds in the room. He touched Helene's elbow. She didn't seem to feel it. Then, she stood up. The movement was stiff, robotic. She did not look at my father. She did not look at the committee. She looked only at me. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. What was there to say? The entire vocabulary of her power, threats, tears, manipulations, was obsolete, a dead language in this new world of verifiable data. She turned and walked toward the frosted glass door. Her steps were unnaturally steady. The door closed behind her with a soft, pneumatic hiss. For a moment, there was only the profound emptiness she left behind. Then, we heard it. Through the soundproofed walls, we could just make out the sound of her heels on the marble floor outside. It wasn't the confident, rhythmic click of a corporate executive. It was a frantic, uneven staccato, the sound of a desperate flight, the sound of a complete and total unraveling. A polite, distant ding announced the arrival of the executive elevator, a soft whoosh as the doors slid shut. And then, silence. A silence as deep and absolute as the view from the 27th floor. Helene Cross had been erased. My tablet, sitting on the obsidian table in front of me, buzzed once. The vibration was a physical shock in the stillness. I glanced down at the screen. It was a push notification from the Halo Bell app, a simple, automated message, generated by a server miles away, triggered by a data-sharing agreement I had digitally signed with the Greyhaven Police Department. Neighbor Nora Dalrymple has successfully shared file Motion Event 2041101825, MP4 with the authorities. The process was not just complete, it was now propagating, moving from the private, corporate sphere into the public, criminal one, a digital tendril reaching out from the boardroom to the courthouse. Across the table, the acting CEO, Mark Redding, finally picked up the gray envelope. He broke the seal with his thumb and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. He read it, nodded once, and slid it over to Arthur Vance, who already had his own tablet open, preparing the necessary legal filings. The machine was already moving on, fitting the new component into the space where the faulty one had been. It was then that my father finally moved. He had been standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the cold, bright sky, a ghost at the funeral of his own marriage. He walked slowly, not toward the table, but toward me. He stopped beside my chair, not quite looking at me, his gaze fixed on the skyline. He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between us, thick with 5 years of unspoken truths. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper, a sound so small it was almost lost in the vastness of the room, a question as small as dust. "Are you in pain?" He was looking for an entry point, a way back into a relationship he had allowed to crumble. He was asking about the bruise, the physical hurt, because it was the only part of the equation he could comprehend. I looked up at his reflection in the glass, at the face of a man who had chosen peace over truth, until the truth became a $30 billion liability. "Yes," I answered, and my voice was honest, clear, and cold. It held no accusation, no anger. It was simply a statement of fact. "I am." I paused, then added the codicil, the clarifying appendix that he needed to understand the new terms of our relationship. But the pain was documented. It was recorded, time-stamped, and processed according to procedure. It served its purpose. His reflection winced. He understood. My pain was no longer a wound for him to soothe. It had been an asset, a piece of evidence, a key that unlocked a system. It had been leveraged, and the transaction was now complete. I was not his daughter seeking comfort. I was the compliance officer, reporting a successful resolution. He said nothing else. He simply walked to the door and left, leaving me with the committee, the lawyers, and the quiet hum of the corporation rebalancing itself. At 11:00 a.m., the internal communication went out to all senior staff. Helene Cross has been separated from the company, effective immediately. At 11:05 a.m., The acting CEO sent a confirmation to West Point Labs. The breach has been cured. We look forward to our continued partnership. The great, complex machinery of the merger was back on its tracks, moving forward as if nothing had happened. I stood and looked out the window. Below, the city of Greyhaven was laid out like a schematic, all clean lines and logical grids under a cold autumn sun. The river was a steady gray line. The traffic flowed in predictable patterns. Everything was in its place. The world looked like a balanced chart, a system in perfect equilibrium now that the erroneous variable had been removed. I reached into my briefcase and took out a small, folded piece of notepaper, worn soft at the creases. It was my mother's last letter to me, written in her spidery, fading hand. It was not a letter of love and goodbyes. It was a letter of instruction. Don't fight with screams. Fight with records. I unfolded it and read the words one last time. Then, I folded it carefully and slid it into the now empty gray envelope that had held the succession plan. The plan had been executed. The directive was fulfilled. Her war was finally over. There were no more words needed. I picked up my personal phone, the cheap, untraceable burner I had been using. The screen was still lit. I had left the Halo Bell app open. On the screen was the image I had frozen on the monitor in the boardroom. A still frame from a video file, the pale yellow porch light, the dark, wet stone of the top step, the empty space where a life, a career, and a marriage had been dismantled by a single, well-documented act of violence. The moment was over. The motion had ceased, and all that was left was the record. The screen went black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It means the world to me. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where you're listening from and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.